All right. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome. Of course, I'm Karen. I'm Familia Hernandez Starling on Facebook. And I'm really happy that our community can come out and sort of chat and talk and brainstorm about things like H5N1 because I know right now there's a lot of anxiety about what's happening. What do I do? What should I be doing? What should I prioritize? And obviously, H5N1 is not the only thing going on. We're in the middle of a COVID surge, and we have a lot of political unrest, and we have a lot of climate change issues and all sorts of things happening. So the way that I've found personally to deal with stuff is to eat the elephant one bite at a time, and try to break things down and see what are the things that I can control and what are the things that I can't. So of course, I have to start out with a disclaimer. This is not medical advice. I am not a doctor, nor do I play one on TV. Um, I do work in healthcare, but this is just my personal experience and my personal way and perspective to sort of synthesize pertinent information right now about H5N1, and sort of the things that I'm thinking about, and then the ways that I like to find to be solutions that help me both feel more prepared and make it feel like a more kind of manageable problem. So all of that being said, buyer beware. Any of my any of my advice you take is at your own risk. But I did make some notes, so I'm hopefully not going to be so rambly. And I did want to talk about a few things that I think are pertinent. And some of this stuff, a lot of you guys already know. I know that many of you are really informed and stay up to date on a lot of these kinds of infectious disease topics, just like you do on COVID. But I do think it's worthwhile to sort of come together and take a little collective breath and have a look at what we can do, what we can't do, and sort of where we are with the information. So I'm just going to dive right in. And I want to start with the reassuring things about H5N1, or the things that, like, when I go, oh, what's happening, what's coming, the things that let me sort of take a breath and say, okay, we're all right. And one of the things that reassures me is that, even though this is a particularly, sort of nasty strain, and it is certainly something that we're keeping our eye on, this is an influenza A virus. Okay. That means it's not an unknown. It's not like COVID. It's not a novel virus. We understand influenza A a lot better. We know the things that kill it. We know what doesn't kill it. We do have, Tamiflu that we know works as well against it as it does against whatever influenza A strains there are. We do have already developed vaccines against it. Obviously, we don't have, enough of them to vaccinate everybody, but we are not dealing with a complete and utter unknown. And so when I start thinking about H5N1 and worrying about it a little bit, I have to remind myself that it's not a novel. I mean, it's not real. I mean, it's a novel mutation, but it's not really sort of a novel virus strain like COVID was. We know how to deal with influenza A. The second thing that reassures me is going back to, like, all of the COVID data, is that the R naught of avian flu or H5N1 is not nearly as high as COVID. So it's not nearly as transmissible. The R naught is, if you had a disease naive population, how many other people would one person that was infected actually infect? And the most infectious virus that we had before COVID came along was measles. And it had an R naught somewhere around 14-ish, 12 to 14-ish, depending on what studies you read. And originally COVID was less than that. And then as Omicron came along, COVID met it or rivaled it or surpassed it. Some of the Omicron data from South Africa actually gave it a theoretical R naught of 24. So COVID is by far um, uh, the the most transmissible virus that particularly we have to worry about now. Although I did just happen to, I haven't looked at R naughts in a long time, and I just had to happen to sort of look it up. There's R naughts, and then there's sort of RTs, or like what's happening actually in real time. And it seems like we've gotten COVIDs down to about somewhere between three and six, with now combined vaccination and prior infection. So that does come down as a population is exposed. To give you perspective on flu A or on H5N1, it's gonna usually has an R naught of around 2. So if COVID, infects 14 people, bird flu is going to infect 2. That's really reassuring to me. It's we know as a community, as a group, how to protect ourselves against, airborne illnesses. We know how to protect ourselves against transmissible diseases. We've learned a lot in the last 5 years. We've learned about respirators. We've learned about fomite transmission. We've learned about all the tools that we can use. And those same tools are going to help us when it comes to, H5N1. We're not starting from back in 2019 where we all ran around and, went to the mall on a Saturday night and, let our kids lick the ball pit. Not that maybe we didn't actually do that, but you know what I mean. Like compared to then to now, we've made a lot of lifestyle changes, and those things are going to help us and protect us, and they're going to work against avian flu. What works against COVID is going to work against the avian flu for the most part, particularly when we're talking about airborne transmission. It's not as transmissible as COVID. We don't have to worry as much about it being as aerosol and infective, and we know what to do. The next thing that really reassures me and makes me feel better is this letter right here that I'm going to share with you. Tell me if you can see it on my screen. Give me a thumbs up. Hopefully you're looking at the letter and not my Facebook page. Can you see? Okay, thank you, Christina. This is from Plus Life, and this letter actually we got back in April. We've been watching H5N1 now for almost 2 years, back from when it went from birds into mammals. All the sea lions started dying, and then it sort of came, into other land mammals, and we sort of watched it, and now it's, of course, in the cows and the chickens. So this is not something that just, was sprung on us overnight. But back in, I think this was April, we asked Plus Life, hey, can you detect H5N1 with your influenza A assay? And the answer was unequivocally yes. So that's great. If you have a Plus Life machine, you should be able to run the influenza test. And if you pop positive for influenza A, then that will detect H5N1 if you have it. Now, it's not going to tell you if you have some regular old strain of of influenza A, or if you have H5N1. It's just going to say influenza A. But if you have a high suspicion, or you've been in some sort of scenario where you think you have, then this would prompt you to get more testing. And we're going to talk about that in a second. That's going to be your health department. They're not like licensing private labs right now to do any H5N1 testing, which is on one of the cons that I'm going to talk about in a second. But at least you could use your Plus Life, see you had influenza A, and if you wanted to know for sure if you had avian flu or not, then you could take the next steps. The other thing that's reassuring to me that I want to show you is, oops, not that one, that UV also works for influenza A. The UV things that we have, the tools that we have and use, should also be effective against H5N1. Here's a study, and this is back from, I believe, 2018. Yeah, so this data has been around a while. And this was 95% activated 95% of H1N1. So we still have, again, some of these tools that we've used, learned how to use for COVID, that we can also dual purpose for H5N1. So we're ahead of the curve in terms of what we know and how we can deal with it. And then the other thing that I will say personally, and of course, this is just speculation because no one really has a crystal ball. But personally, I do still think that even though we're getting some pretty strong early signals now with the infections from the dairy workers, with the cattle, I think we probably still have a little bit of time We have been following the mutations that are necessary for H5N1 to become human to human really transmissible. And we are gathering speed. We are gathering those cluster mutations that we need, but we're still missing a few critical mutations, which means we still have a little bit of time. I would not be surprised if this cold and flu season, when I say this cold and flu season, I'm talking about, November, December of this year. We might pick up those mutations that fast. We might not. It may be, spring of next year. It may hold off for us. We don't really know. But we're not seeing the signals, working in healthcare that I would expect us to see if, there's some people out there who are, sort of afraid that this is creeping up on us and there's a bunch of undetected H5N1 infections out there running around. And I'm not saying that there are not any, but I'm saying that if there is a highly lethality infectious strain, I don't think it's out there like to any appreciable level right now, because while we're not testing, so we may not see a bunch of, H5N1 bulletins or whatever in healthcare. We're going to see a spike in influenza A cases. We're going to see people getting, tested, and, we're going to start saying, oh, there's a particularly nasty influenza A strain going around that's putting people in the hospital. And that's not the case right now. Right now, it's pretty much, pure COVID happening, and a pretty big uptick in COVID. But we're not seeing, our healthcare systems being overrun by influenza A patients. And so that's reassuring to me when I think about, where we are with H5N1, and how much of my time and energy today, right now, do I need to devote to, worrying about that, or, what kind of, how big of a problem it is. And I will take questions at the end. I see that there's a couple of questions in the chat, and I will sort of take them take them at the end of my little spiel that I want to give. So those are the things that reassure me. Now, the things that, give me pause are sort of the bad news. That's sort of the good news. The bad news from my perspective about H5N1 is that we do know that this jump is coming. We know it's an influenza A virus. We know it's going to act like an influenza A virus. We know that some of the influenza A viruses are worse than others. We know that the, 1918 flu pandemic started out with some milder cases, and then it sort of seemed to die off, and then a lot of more severe cases, and then it sort of hit, and got a little bit worse. And so I do think it's coming. I'm not trying to minimize it and say it's not a threat at all, or not something that should be on our radar, but so that would be the bad news for me, is that as we've been watching it over the past couple of years, and we've watched it jump to mammals, and then we've watched what it's done to the aquatic mammals, and we've watched how it's come. I mean, the cases right now that we've seen in the dairy farm workers have been on the milder side. I personally don't really want my eyes to bleed even mildly, but they've not been lethal cases. And so it is going to mutate. It's going to jump. It's going to go person to person, and it's going to do that. I mean, I would be really, really surprised if we got, another year before it jumped, given the high rate of evolution that it has right now. The mortality rate, right? COVID's mortality rate, somewhere 2 to 3%. And obviously this mortality rate of the avian flu has been a lot higher, 50%, 70%, depending. Now, if it's going to become, a lot more transmissible, the mortality rate really can't stay that high, because then, we as hosts die off before we can transmit it. And so it's probably going to come down. But even with something with a 10% mortality rate, if you think about COVID at 2 or 3, a 10% mortality rate, it's going to be pretty devastating. So that's the bad news, is that this is coming, and that the mortality rate, even if it drops way, way lower than it is probably going to be something that's going to get everybody's attention. Another bad news is the political pushback on mitigations, right? And we're all uber aware of that as people in the COVID community, the harassment for masks, the, lack of the ability to mandate them anymore, the political climate around mitigations, and how it's almost become, in a lot of places, a political statement, whether or not you protect yourself. And so that's going to work against us, of course, when it comes to trying to mitigate a new pandemic with a different set of characteristics. Now, how much that stays in play will probably depend on, of course, how severe the symptoms become and how high the mortality rate is. Because if it gets high enough, it will be really, really hard to ignore. But that is at least initially going to give H5N1 more of an advantage to spreading in our population. Another thing that's really bad news is a lot of people they're not following. They're not aware. I'm really, really surprised. And again, like I said, I work in healthcare. I'm really, really surprised about how much this is not on anybody's radar. It's on the health department's radar. We're getting those, I posted a couple of the, information stuff that's now pumping out from the CDC to the clinics. The health departments are starting to put their processes in place. But even just other people, other entities, the regular healthcare system, and then of course your average person walking down the street, it's really not on people's radar. It's really not. I did an Instacart order topping off some things the other day, and there's a shortage of plastic bags in my area. The Instacart shoppers can't get bags. And so I ended up having to like mask up and go help the Instacart shopper pull my supply order out of her vehicle. And, she was confused. And I said, oh, H5N1, you might want to, think about, she actually had a mask, thinking about what that might do to the supply chain. You might want to pick some stuff up. And she was like, what's that? What is that? What is the bird flu? And so I think just the general awareness, and it's also really easy for stuff to get buried in the current news cycle. There's so much going on that this is not on the top of people's list. And so I think a lot of people are gonna come along, and they're gonna get sort of gobsmacked by it, which is sort of ironic, since we're still dealing with COVID and people should be more prepared, not less. That all being said, the two things that really keep me up at night about bird flu or H5N1, it's not so much necessarily for me any of the things that I've mentioned so far, because again, going back to the good things, I'm pretty confident that we know how to prepare for this. We know how to take care of ourselves. We do have a lot of tools to mitigate it. Obviously, it's no fun watching the people around you get sick, but I think that we do have, we're at my family and our community is better positioned. But the things that really disturb me are the impacts on supply chain and healthcare disruption. I do believe that there will be enough people that are going to get sick, that the supply chains disruptions that we saw during COVID are probably going to be worse. We do now have an immune compromised population. Sorry, my dog is making my coffee. We have an immunocompromised population as a whole. We're running those immune deficits because of COVID. And so I think we're more susceptible to new pathogens, not just H5N1, but to the new fungal infections, to other viruses, to other kinds of weird things we've seen, like the weird strep A strains. Of course, monkeypox keeps sort of rearing its ugly head and coming back. We've seen, Ebola upticks over in Africa that sort of are coming and going. And so the supply chain disruptions to me are a big deal, especially because my family is medically complex, and we do require prescription medications on a regular basis, and we do need healthcare access. So the supply chain disruptions and the healthcare disruptions, I'm telling you guys, our healthcare system is just, it's holding on by a thread right now. Everything from, there are not enough specialists to treat people. There's the long COVID onslaught and the increase in the disability rates, the increase in dementia rates, the increase in the cancer rates, the healthcare professionals burnout and people stopping work in the healthcare arena. So all of those things make me extremely concerned when this, when H5N1 hits on top of already the COVID burden that we have and the disability burden that we have. The healthcare disruptions and the supply chain disruptions are the two things that I'm trying to anticipate and sort of, take priority to prepare for. And then the other bad news that sort of keeps me up at night again is the how so many things are happening at once and they exacerbate each other. So, for example, we have a lot of climate change events going on right now. We have, Burl, the earliest strongest hurricane that's come through. We're having, these extreme heat waves. In some places, the power grids are wobbling a bit. We have the wildfires that have now, sparked again, and these kinds of air quality concerns. And I don't know, and I'm sure you guys know this, but air quality does affect transmission rates, both for COVID and for influenza. So I did also just pull up a couple of things just so you guys know I don't make stuff up. Um, if the PM 2.5 or some of the other air pollutants get high, then that makes human respiratory epithelial cells more susceptible to respiratory viruses like influenza. And so there have been several studies that show that when air quality is bad, then there's higher transmission of COVID, there's higher transmission of other respiratory viruses, including influenza. And so that's just one way that these things connect. If we have climate change driving wildfires, which is affecting our air quality, and then that's irritating our lung cells and making them more susceptible to things like the bird flu. And then, of course, in any kind of situation where you have displacement, where we have flooding, or there's been some dams that have broken in the past couple of weeks across the country. There, when people have to move, then people crowd. That also spreads disease. Not the movement of people to avoid the disaster areas and the crowding of people into shelters or with family members or whatever also increases vectors of transmission. So, having these things pile on top of each other, having, the threat of some, political unrest that can unsettle people and the climate change issues that we have compounding things, all of those things make it where I am more concerned about, H5N1 in those contexts versus, if those things were really calm and we weren't worrying about them, then the cumulative effects wouldn't be found. So all of that being said, what I really like to do though is I like to say sort of, so what do we do about this? Like we can sit around and worry about it and talk about good stuff and bad stuff and all of those kinds of things all day long. But I like to think of myself as a problem solver, as a solution giver. And so what are some of the things that, that I'm trying to do to uh with respect to H5N1? Honestly, right now I'm still sort of in prep mode. I haven't changed a lot of what we do sort of on the day to day. Our family doesn't usually drink milk and we don't drink raw milk. So I haven't had to really worry about the food supply as much. My take on that, if you ask me, is that I wouldn't do, raw milk, rare meat. We are cooking our eggs all the way through right now. But I'm not overly concerned with H5N1 in pasteurized milk. I know that there are viral fragments that were still found post pasteurization. I do think that and I mean, again, this is again just my opinion, and there's obviously no studies on this, but I always go back to the polio vaccine and the milkmaids and Jonas Salk and how they, were able to get some immunity to the polio virus by that low level exposure. And The H5N1 has been in our milk since like last December. It's been in here for a really long time, and we're not seeing people get super sick with influenza A. We're not seeing that spike on in that healthcare burden. You know, if you're immunocompromised, or if you have, you know, if it you have a high anxiety level about that, I don't blame people for avoiding it. But personally, I'm not super worried about you know, eating meat or dairy products or anything. We just sort of are not, I mean, we don't really do a whole lot, like I said, of things that are raw anyway. But the change we've made there is we are cooking our eggs all the way through. We're not eating any kind of, you know, rareness and steaks, but we do still eat ice cream. We do still, in my one kid who can do dairy, still will occasionally do some dairy, and I'm okay with that. When The other things that we're doing is catching up on any routine healthcare. And you guys have probably, those of you who've been around the groups for a long time, um, have seen me do the whole batten down the hatches post during like the COVID surges and stuff like that. And so normally right now I would be like, this is not the time to catch up on your, you know, your pending healthcare stuff, because we are now, you know, pretty firmly in a surge in a lot of areas. In the areas that aren't, we're rising. But with H5N1 on the horizon, and with that, in my estimation, possibly happening with cold and flu this fall, I've been still trying to, you know, catch up on any kind of routine healthcare stuff that needs to happen. And we can have a whole nother talk about how to mitigate that. But I would definitely not want to, you know, have, you know, some sort of routine healthcare situation present to me in the middle of healthcare services that are already stressed by an H5N1 pandemic. So dental care, eye care, anything like that, I would say get it on the books and get it done as soon as you can. And then, you know, with the stocking up on, like, you know, prescription meds, and if you can, you know, either trying to figure out how to get a double script, or there's international pharmacies that you can utilize sometimes. And I mean, you can't use your insurance, but if you know, you can pay cash with your regular prescription. So trying to anticipate those kinds of needs, making sure you have your regular, you know, your regular flu meds also on board. I mean, a lot of us, we have our COVID boxes, and a lot of the stuff in the COVID boxes is also going to work for your H5N1 infections, but making sure that you're not running out of things like, you know, fever reducers or other things. Also, your prophy stuff. I mean, we all usually have masks on hand. What might be worth doing is, if H5N1 does, you know, explode, one of the things that we are all going to want to do is reintroduce fomite precautions, because one of the major differences between COVID and H5N1 is, while COVID is way more transmissible in the air, H5N1 is way more fomite transmissible. So, you know, you can get flus basically from, you know, someone coughing in the doorknob, and then you touch your eyes or your mouth or anything like that. And so the fomite transmission that we all sort of used to do pre-COVID, and a lot of us have toned down, would probably need to be reintroduced. If you have, of course, if you have farm animals, there's the whole issue of your shoes. And I know that there's been talks about, you know, how to basically shuck your shoes before you come in, or there's the mats with the disinfectants that you can use to sort of, you know, disinfect the bottom of your shoes before, when you come out of things like a chicken coop, or, you know, if you're out there with your cattle. So you're going to want to really pay attention more than we've had to in a while for COVID about fomites. And so anticipating that, you know, I've, you know, made sure we actually have, I'm just going to show you guys these little things. You know, we have these little handheld UV wands that, I don't know if you guys remember, but, you know, when we were first exploring UV, and we still were doing fomites, I found these to be a really easy way to do like grocery disinfection. They actually, these are not the kind, you don't want to look at them. You don't want to expose your skin. I know that some of our group members have big like room setups where they can like put their groceries and leave the room and turn their UVC lights on, and then it like disinfects there. I'm not that tech savvy, nor do I do that, but these little handheld ones, it beeps with a 3-second exposure. They're not expensive. And if you're not doing like copious volumes, I mean, obviously you can wipe down your groceries, disregard the packages, do that kind of stuff. But one way that we found for quick and easy things to disinfect is the UVC ones. And that's where these little Quantidos cards come in. I don't know if you guys remember these, but the little Quantidos cards that tell you that your UVC is actually real, because you can get counterfeits on Amazon if you're buying them. So they do sell here. I'm going to pop this over for you guys too. They do sell these. Let's see here. Can you guys see my Quantitos card now? I took a picture because I couldn't figure out how to show this to you and not shine it on myself at the same time over Zoom. But these little Quantitos cards, they're about, $10. And if you're going to get some little handheld UVC units, then I recommend that you get a Quantitos card. So you can just double check it lights up if there's actually UVC there that will disinfect. And that way you can be sure that you've gotten the real thing and not gotten something counterfeit that's giving you light that's not actually killing germs, because that would be bad. Um, the other things that, I'm also keeping in mind, Profi has flu data, and they're actually going to come and talk to our groups about their flu data. They actually also just have they have new pollen data that's also just come out. So the good news is, a lot of us are using Profi for COVID prophylaxis. It is also going to be useful to us for H5N1 prophylaxis. So, I'm making sure that my nasal sprays, my mouthwashes, elderberry is something else that's good that stops viral adhesion from the flu to the back of your throat where it likes to sit and replicate. Those kinds of things are the things that I'm focusing on. The other thing I would be doing, we're homeschoolers, by choice with COVID. But if I had children that I had sent back to school, I would be thinking about, what's going to happen when H5N1 hits and you have all those fomite vectors in the school with your children. Are they going to be able to manage that, the fomite? I mean, if I'm assuming most of us who have sent kids back to school, they're sort of still the lone maskers, or they're pretty savvy probably with the airborne stuff. But again, can you be sure that they're not going to, use the bathroom and touch the light switch and then not, pick their nose or something like that? Like, I would definitely be looking at if this happens, during this fall semester or spring semester, do I have plans in place to bring the kids back home, or have I been practicing with my kids, fomite transmission, whichever seems to be the best fit for your family. That's another change that I would be doing. So I guess that's sort of my high level view of the goods and the bads and the things that we can and can't do. I really hope that you guys get that. For me, the takeaway is, we can manage this. This does not seem to me like something that actually is number one overwhelming, paralyzing to me. We're not going to talk about them, but there are other things that I'm really more worried about. Not that we shouldn't be paying attention. And then, of course, we all will look out for each other and in our groups when we do start to see these signals. If we see these signals in healthcare, if we see these signals, stuff's coming from the CDC, then we're all talking, we're all telling each other, and we're all, sort of sounding the alarm as the community to try to get everybody prepared, or as prepared as we can be. I will say that a couple of things, like I said, that we have coming down the pipeline. Profi's going to come and talk, like I said, about their influenza A data and what that means for H5N1. We do have Impang from Open Arrows, who's going to come, and he's going to do a whole UV thing, and he's going to do the far UV thing for us, and he's going to do placement and the different brands and all of that kind of stuff. That's coming up. That we have a date for that one on the 28th. And then there's more stuff coming down the pipe from Plus Life in terms of the customs issues and all of those kind of things, and even some new discounts. And so I think everyone in our community is sort of rallying together around this. And I don't think anyone who's on this Zoom tonight is going to be sort of left out in the cold or not know what's going on as this develops. And so I would have it, on my awareness list, but not on my let's freak out today about list. And I would just, encourage you to take, maybe one small step every week. This week I might up my mask supply. Next week I may try to talk to my physician and get those, extra scripts going on, or locate the international pharmacies. The next week I may make sure that I've got my routine, things scheduled, like just sort of take it off in bite-sized chunks and work towards getting stuff done. Again, I could be wrong, but I don't think this is something we're going to wake up in the morning and go, oh my God, we're in a crisis about. I think that it's something that we can still work towards in, incremental steps to be ready for. So with that, I am going to start taking some questions. And again, with the caveat that these are just sort of my opinions. And I'm going to roll back and see what you guys have been saying in the chat, because it's sort of hard for me to talk and read the chat at the same time. So, all right. How can you be so sure that the characteristics of a virus that hasn't evolved to transmit from human to human yet, are you confident that when it does evolve, these reassuring characteristics will stay the same? I am confident that it's not going to mutate to not be an influenza A virus. It is an influenza A virus. And the mutations that are happening right now are mutations that are moving it towards being able to fit in the receptors in humans that make it more transmissible. The severity is what the question is. I mean, it's a pretty devastating flu virus right now to the people who have caught it, right? Like the mortality rate is super high. The thought is just that when it mutates to be human to human, then the mortality rate will drop. So I'm confident that it's going to remain an influenza A virus. It's not going to become some other virus, or it won't be bird flu we're talking about. We'll be talking about something completely different. But right now it is accumulating the receptors to move from humans to humans. But it won't be not an influenza A virus. And influenza A viruses by definition act in certain ways that we do understand. Can you use Plus Life to test H5N1 in milk? I do not believe you can. That's probably a better question for Leo Cat in Forward Motion from The Virus Sucks, but I think it has been asked there before, and I think the answer is no. The pH has to be right, and that the reagents are developed for, human sort of saliva, and I don't think you can use it to test milk right now. There has been a lot of testing, and there's been a lot of data published even since that first, oh, there's viral fragments in the dairy. There've been more things that have come out. And I mean, again, they're mostly reassuring. There's not like replicable virus in anything that's pasteurized. Now, raw milk's a different story. There's definitely going to be replicable, live virus in things that are, the meat that's raw or milk that's raw. So and eggs. There's been, live virus in raw eggs. So raw is a completely different story. But if you're cooking it and it's pasteurized, my personal take on it is that you're okay right now. What brand of handheld UV is that? This little one that I have, this one is actually, I don't know, it's the like TV guide one that says like as seen on TV. I actually don't think they sell these anymore, because I looked the other day, these were like $5. And they were sold out like on Amazon, where I got a bunch of these a long time ago. But they had similar models, they're about $20. And I think I'll have to go look. I posted in one of the groups in a comment, someone was looking for one, and I posted one. But basically, just about any of them will do. I would just recommend the safety check to make sure you're actually getting the UVC by using one of these little cards. But it's about a $20 investment at this point to get the handheld UVCs, and it's a 3-second disinfectant rate. So, you have to think about, like, basically when you're disinfecting something, you want to lay it there. You want to make sure the light's shining on all of its surface for 3 seconds, and then you flip it over and do the other side for 3 seconds. Anyway, that's how you use them. With COVID spiking and H5N1 on the horizon, can our groups get current discounts on Plus Life, Profi, Sterile Ray, Clean Space, protection, all that? Yeah, we're working on that, like I said. I know that I think M's talk's going to happen first on the 28th, and then I think Profi's coming along next to do their H5N1 data. And then Plus Life has something that's coming in August. So yes, COVID spiking H5N1 on the horizon. We're always trying to talk to, the people who have the tools that we really like to use and ask them to help our community out. What is Profi? Yeah, we have a whole group. I think Gertie's actually here, but we have a whole group dedicated to discussing Profi and the different kinds of nasal sprays. It's a nasal spray. It's mostly pectin and gelin, and it traps, viral particles. It traps bacterial particles. It traps pollen, and you just basically, you spray it on, and it becomes another layer in your, Swiss cheese mitigations to protect you against respiratory insults. And so there is a video on our YouTube channel about this. There is a group here. Gertie, you want to say something?
No, sorry. I just wanted to confirm that you said I was here in regards to Profi.
Oh, thanks. Okay. Gertie's one of our mods in our still COVIDing with Profi nasal spray group. So there's lots of information about Profi there. We also do have a PAPR group. PAPRs work great against H5N1 too, and 95s work great against H5N1. Like I said, guys, we have the tools. We know how to use them. We really can feel reassured that, whatever respiratory virus comes along, we are going to be able to protect ourselves. It's just everyone around us, and again, like I said, the supply chain issues that we need to worry about. Can you provide a link for the disinfecting mat for shoes? I can, but I'll post it in the groups versus digging it out right now. I'm posting it in the chats. What are your thoughts on H5N1 being in the wastewater even when there's no dairy farms nearby? Well, birds have it. It's in small mammals. So just like we saw with COVID spreading throughout the deer, there have been cats that have died of it. Wherever there are animals at this point, I'm not surprised that it's around in the wastewater. And I really honestly I'm not surprised that, we may have a low level of transmission in the human population. It's my take that if wastewater went super high and we didn't have a lot of people, falling out in the hospitals and our hospitals being overrun, that would be a good thing. I would love to see this, transmit from human to human and be completely, benign. Just another, kind of flu-like cold. That would be the best news in the world. So if I see H5N1 in wastewater and I don't see the emergency rooms overrun, then I'm like, oh, that's great. Unfortunately, personally, I really don't believe that it's going to hold that way. Just historically in the way that it's been accumulating these mutations and its high mortality rate. I do think that I don't want anyone to think that I'm saying we shouldn't be taking this seriously. We should. I'm just saying that the key indicators right now for me to go, oh my God, and again, what am I going to change? Right. We already have a lot of precautions in our life because of COVID. And so what are the things that we wouldn't do, if we had an H5N1 outbreak? A lot of those same things we already wouldn't do because it's, COVID surge. So, okay. Is that low R naught for humans? Yes, it is. Via what transmission mechanism? Well, when they estimate R naughts, they're looking at all mechanisms of transmission. It's a virologist thing where they estimate how many people one person could infect, whether it's respiratory or fomite or a combination of those, or even touch transmission based on R naught. The R naughts for viruses, it's very easy to Google them. They're well established, and it's a way that virologists have talked about different kinds of viruses, for a really long time. So it's not super hard to go look up. It's just, R and then a 0 in parentheses to find the R naughts of the different kinds of viruses. International pharmacy possibilities. Yes, if you guys want, we can do a thread on international pharmacies that people have used that are reliable. actually have a fair number of them that we've even used through our clinics for some drugs that are really expensive in the US, but are more affordable if you get them through Canadian pharmacies or through Indian pharmacies. Yes, we can do some international pharmacy stuff. Isn't the CDC sending the eye swab instructions out a sign that we might wake up tomorrow and it's out of control? I don't think so. I think they just know it's coming, and I think they're trying to do the best that they can to get ready for it, knowing that they're grossly not going to be ready. I don't know if you guys know or not, but what happened in January was the FDA decided that it would not allow private labs to validate assays to detect not just H5N1, but to detect, it's not going to let private labs do novel assays anymore. So anything that was validated in the past, they can do, but in something new like H5N1, private labs are not allowed to go through their typical process like they did for COVID. With COVID, we had little labs popping up doing PCRs everywhere because you could buy the reagents, you could prove that your process and your tests were calibrated and all of that, and then you could be, approved as validated, and then you could sell a COVID test. They're not allowing that process anymore for anything, which is really, really dumb, in my opinion. We're going to need more testing capacity, and they've sort of shot themselves in the foot and made it where H5N1 is pretty much going to have to be tested through your health department, at least especially in the beginning. I think they said they have 11 vendors that they have approved in terms of the actual test materials. They're going to announce those in August, and then we'll see if they allow private labs to somehow buy into those 11 approved vendors and at least remarket the test. But as of right now, the only place you can get tested for H5N1 is through your health department. So if you come in and you've had contact with cows and you have bleeding through your eyes and you want to be tested for H5N1, then your physician first has to test you for influenza A and then send over, follow the process through whatever your county health department has decided to recommend that you get tested, or send a specimen to recommend you get tested. So I actually think this is sort of a good thing. What we're talking about, for those of you who don't know, is we got this congenital swab specimen instructions through our clinic because we're a CLIA-waived lab, basically telling us that if we're going to test people for H5N1, we need to do the throat, the nose, and the eye. And so the fact that they're sending out these testing instructions to all of the labs that are certified in the US means that they do expect, there to be a need for doing this. So see, it's basically an eye swab, a nasal pharyngeal, and then a combined nasal and oral pharyngeal. So they want more swabs to be able to detect this. But I actually think that this is a good sign that they actually are trying to get at least a little bit prepared for what's happening. Will plus light. Okay, we already read that one. Is it already time to avoid farms and places where people get livestock, like petting zoos? So H5N1 kills chickens really quickly. I've talked about this a lot with my friends who have, backyard flocks or who have even more extensive flocks. And if you look it up, if you're petting chickens, they're usually visibly sick or dead within 24 hours. So it seems to be pretty obvious. The cows, on the other hand, I don't think they are quite as obvious. And so personally, would I have, my kids snuggling up against, calves, and if there's a lot of them in a farm, I probably would not be signing up for those petting zoos at this point, especially if you're in an area where there've already been cases. Now, if you're on like a little family farm, I mean, again, it's going to be sort of your personal risk kind of ratio. Definitely, I would make sure that the kids are, wearing their mask and washing their hands. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't go into like crowded livestock settings, or I wouldn't be going into the chicken houses or anything like that personally. Um, let's see. Yeah, newbie webinar stuff. Yes, now I don't think that there are neurological effects for people even with other flu strains. But you're right, the terrible neurological effects. This one is more neuroinvasive. So that is a way that it actually, does differ from some of the more conventional flu strains. I'm not saying that this isn't going to be worse. I'm saying that we know what kind of virus is, we know what kind of viral capsid it is, we know what medicines kill it. I'm not trying to say that this isn't, a really bad bug, because it is. I'm just saying it's not a brand new one, and we have seen neurological effects post influenza before. There were a lot of neurological effects, post the 1918 pandemic. So um, we have seen that. Mortality high to humans, yes. I mean, right now the mortality is extremely high for the original H5N1 stuff. The ones that are coming out of the dairy farmers, it's not. I think that there's been maybe one death of the immunocompromised guy. I think he was in Colorado. But most of the dairy workers so far that have been tested, they have all lived. Oh, Christine already said other influenza viruses have neuro effects. Um, just got there. How many months of stock supplies would be advised to stockpile? Okay, so my personal recommendation is, start with 2 weeks. Once you get 2 weeks, go for a month. Once you get a month, try to do it incrementally. Like if we say, all right, everybody get 3 months worth of stuff and figure out where to put it. First of all, you may not need that three. I mean, some of that 3 months of stuff you may have wanted to rotate through, or it may be soon. Like that's just good advice in general to try to have, 3 weeks is like the minimum recommendation for FEMA. But again, depending on your situation, your financial situation, how many people you're dealing with, what your needs are, I would recommend that everybody start with 2 weeks. And then once you get 2 weeks, once you know that you could go 2 weeks and never leave your house and never buy anything, and not go to the grocery store once during that 2 weeks and be reasonably happy, then go ahead and get another 2 weeks and hit your month. And then once you have 1 month, then you can sort of, feel set, and then build on that, build on that to whatever then kind of capacity that you have. Don't overlook, all the nooks and crannies. If you have a small space, don't forget about under the bed. Don't forget about, if you have the shelf at the top of your closet is, a couple of feet away from the ceiling, maybe you can double shelf things up there. Don't forget about, again, those kinds of nooks and crannies where you can use to do some things. And then also, it's sort of like when I was a midwife, we would, people would be like, oh, I've got to get ready for the baby and stock all these things. And we'd be like, what do you really need? Well, really, most people mostly, need something to feed the baby, and some diapers for the baby. And, if you're in a cold climate, something to keep the baby warm. We don't have to have all the paraphernalia. Like, what do you really need to make sure you've got, water and food and a reasonably comfortable environment for temporary disruptions? What's your plan if you have to leave your home? Like, what if your air quality, get like, remember, I think of like the chemical spills on the trains and stuff. What if you have to evacuate, but you then also at the same time we have ongoing pandemic? So those are some of the kind of different scenarios that you sort of want to think about. So what would my plan be in both of those scenarios? But just start easy with 2 weeks, and then build as you can off of that 2 week supply. Could we get a shopping list together in one of our groups? Sure. Um, I actually have some pre-made shopping lists too from various communities if you're interested. That we can start a thread though. Let's see, the 150-watt sterile rice saber. Yeah, that one's really expensive. Um, though, so that's why I was showing the smaller handheld units, because they're a lot more economical for people. But the 150-watt saber will also do foam mat transmission. The latest R naught estimates for COVID. Well, so like I said, the R naught is when the population is naive, and we're not a naive population anymore. But basically, the number of people right now that one infected person with COVID infects is between 3 and 6. In the latest estimates, is hand sanitizer kill H5N1? Yeah, I mean, again, there's lots of different kinds of, hand sanitizers and cleaners, depending on which kind you use, but mostly anything that you're going to use to kill the regular kinds of flus are going to kill the strain of influenza A as well. Anything above 40% alcohol, yeah. Um, Impacts to the food supply. Yes. So yes, impacts to the food, just like all of, I mean, again, all of the supply chain, the food supply too. Not, I don't even necessarily know so much in animal culling, just as, you know, being, we have to have people to drive the trucks. We have to have people to stock the shelves. We have to have, you know, people to move goods around. And so we already know that we're going to have food supply impacts right now because of the higher temperatures that they're affecting um, crop growth in the US and in other key countries. So I would definitely be, you know, anticipating some food supply disruptions, and think about the other thing that's really good to do is start eating some stuff now that you might eat in a situation with of scarcity, but you wouldn't necessarily eat, you know, otherwise. And making sure too that other people in your family or your kids will eat as well, you know. So because you really don't want to be in the stress of, you know, in a pandemic situation and you have a food supply disruption, and then, you know, your 7-year-old refuses to eat whatever's in your, you know, supply pantry. So make sure that you're getting stuff that, you know, you can rotate into your regular meals and your regular food supply as you know, as you prep and get your family ready. Um, if I'm able to, in terms of pet food, like right now, I have a month, I have four weeks of food for my dogs. I'll probably just, as I can, you know, pick up another. I mean, basically I have two big dogs, and we sort of go through one 30-pound bag a week, and so I'll just keep, you know, stacking the bags up for a while. Water specialist here. We have high E. coli contamination on the shorelines around the Great Lakes due to this season's agricultural green space and urban runoff, and high avian fecal matter along waterways. This also influences incidences of noticing H5N1 and COVID in wastewater testing. Thank you. All right. Gertie will help us make plant milks. That's great. Um, there are fragments there. Okay. Trying to see if there's any other questions. Um, Hydrogen peroxide, isopropyl alcohol. Do we expect Tamiflu to be effective with H5N1? Yes, they do expect Tamiflu to be as effective as it is with the regular flu strains. They are asking, you know, basically sort of the pharmacies to stock up on Tamiflu. But Tamiflu, there's another one. Tamiflu is one, and we have another antiviral that they've also recommended. I can't remember what it's called, but there are two antivirals that will work against this strain that they're trying to ramp production of. Some international pharmacies will dispense without a prescription. Technically, they're all supposed to have a dispensing. But there have been some that have been a little bit more lax about grabbing the prescription than others. So uh, Christine is ahead of me answering the questions before I get to read them. Sorry if I'm duplicating that. Do you have a Discord we can join? No, I don't have a Discord. I'm woefully Discord inept. But I know that there are some good Discords around. And I'm in H5N1 discussion. I don't mod, our mod team doesn't necessarily mod there, and we don't necessarily post our H5N1 stuff there all the time. You know, our priority is sort of to push it out into our groups first, but when we think about it, we try to go post over there as well. Do you think the same would apply to a regular zoo? Honestly, I've been really sad. I've been sort of avoiding birds and bird feces the best I can for a while. Of course, it's been in the birds now for a couple of years, and so they used to think that small songbirds weren't affected. Now, some small songbirds actually are starting to show to be affected. So I've sort of tried to stay away from that. So I think honestly, going to a regular zoo right now, I think is still okay. You're obviously not going to be like kissing the lions or anything. Um, I mean, again, if you're having you know, again, your regular COVID precautions, we don't, you know, run to the zoos during peak crowded times or anything like that. But I think if you're NFIT tested, you know, N95 mask, and you're outdoors and you're off peak times, personally, I think you could, you know, do a zoo. I would still be a little bit leery. I mean, I'm a little bit leery of a lot of really heavily fomite transmitted things, not just during H5N1, right? Because who wants rotavirus, norovirus, any of those other things that, are sort of touch passed around, and we've seen sort of surges of the different kinds of things of those. And again, I have immunocompromised people in my family too, so we probably are going to be a little bit more careful. But we have done the zoo a few times uh, during off-peak hours and are fit tested in 95s, and I think I feel okay about that. We're having egg shortages in Australia, 3 different variants, not H5N1. I don't have anything to make of that. I have no idea. There's so much weird stuff going on. I don't know if anybody can keep track of it all. Do we have to worry about delivered food? I mean, I don't know exactly what kind of delivered food you're talking about. Do you mean like people delivering your groceries, or do you mean like takeout that's delivered? Again, there's various reasons why you would or wouldn't have food that's prepared by other people, and that's probably a whole nother topic, and that's also going to be, sort of risk specific. And it's, cold foods are obviously going to be harder to, like, reheat. A lot of people do the extra reheating thing. I mean, again, right now, beyond like what I normally wouldn't eat, like there's certain things I normally wouldn't do just from an infectious disease standpoint. In general, I'm not doing anything extra or extra special about, whether or not we have, food deliveries. But if it does pop off, if once we do start to see those signals, that we need to tighten things up, then we would probably go back to what we were doing, sort of really early on COVID with, not really eating anything that was prepared outside of the home. We do now. Stockpile non-perishables that will nourish you. Yeah, beans and rice are great, right? Um, we already asked about that one. There's some graphics here. Can you please share the link? Oh, someone's already shared it. That's nice. Water filters. Do it or you need to distill it. Oh, we have our water water specialist answering now. Basically, yeah, boiling it would would be my guess too. Does Profi assume nasal only breathing for efficacy? No, it does not. The studies are people breathing regularly. Flu and virals. All right. I think that's mostly, oh, what are the signals we should be looking for when you say pop off? That's a great question. Well, again, we're already watching wastewater. And there's certain areas where it tends to rise. Eventually, we're going to see it, be everywhere. But the signals that I will be looking for, I'm specifically going to be looking for an increase in influenza A coming into the urgent cares and the ERs. So, and then again, sort of like we did with COVID, they've actually done studies that have shown that the best way to predict a COVID wave is if you know somebody who's infected or not, or looking at even on social media, people posting, oh, I have this infection. I know someone who's infected. They've actually done some really cool math studies about that. So when you start to, when you start to see people having, more, you'll hear more and more flu chatter, but particularly for me, because they may not know, again, we may not know that it's H5N1. I'm going to have a real low tolerance for any kind of flu A waves or any kind of flu waves. Once I start seeing people testing positive for the flu, and they do, like when you go in with something that's respiratory enough, that's it's severe enough that you want to go into an urgent care, or you want to, take your kid into an ER when we start seeing pneumonias or different things, they test you for COVID, flu, and RSV, or like the three that they like just sort of routinely pop testing originally. And so I actually have enough, people that I know in the urgent care community or that are ER docs that when they start going, oh, there's a flu wave coming through, then that's going to be one of my signals to sort of batten down the hatches. Any kind of flu wave right now, particularly like I said, if it's an influenza. I mean, if they say it's influenza B, then I may be a little bit, breathe a little easier, but maybe not a whole lot. Like, but the minute I hear influenza A is popping off, then I'm going to have a really sensitive trigger for, taken, turning back on my fomite precautions, turning back down, anything that I wouldn't regularly, um, that I would regularly not do during a flu wave. How long the fomites for H5N1 are viable? Uh, I'm somewhere in the reaches of my memory. I'm saying 3 days. Is that right, Christina? Is it 3 days? Do you remember? You don't remember? Yeah, I think it's 3 days, but I could be wrong. We can look that up.
I know it's longer than COVID, but I haven't looked it up specifically.
And somewhere in my gut recall saying 3 days, but that's not always 100% right. So I'll have to look that up. I just know it's a long time. I know it's way more, way enough that someone bringing me the groceries and sneezing on them, and then me touching them, and touching my nose or my mouth or my eyes can transmit it. So fomites are definitely an issue. Um, Air filter recommendations to take to appointments. Yeah, there's a lot of that. We can get into air filters. There's a lot of that, in the groups. Basically, any of your air filters are gonna, the common air filters that are gonna work. What precautions, food because of COVID, that's sort of outside of the scope. When the ER is testing for COVID, flu, RSV, are these rapids or NATs? Most of the time they're rapids. Sometimes it's either, yep. All right. I thought COVID was viable for up to weeks on some surfaces. Really, the studies haven't borne that out very well. Like surface viability for COVID has,
Maybe frozen.
yeah,
Like that was the
frozen.
one with the frozen food packaging was the only time that it was viable, that it was actually
Right,
potentially to transmit after.
right, yeah. Otherwise they could find again viral fragments, but there was no live culturable virus, even in the like hospital room studies that they did. Um, does the most least protective eye protection look like most to least protective eye protection look like this? A pepper that covers the eyes. Oh, I just got bumped out.
Now, when someone had asked about HC, the hydrochlorous acid cleaning,
Oh yeah, and that should work. That should work too. Like again, we're talking about influenza. So if it kills influenza, it should kill influenza A, H5N1. Um, hard to catch by that route. You need a larger viral load that you would get from just touching things. Yeah, exactly. So definitely it is definitely a bigger problem. Um, it's a bigger problem. Fomites are a bigger problem with H5N1 than they are um, with COVID. And with